My name is Kees, Leune. I've been in higher ed for way too long. And one of the things I do in higher ed is teach. Primarily, I'm not a professor. I'm the information security officer for a local college. But every now and then they ask me to come out and teach a course. So as I do that, because I like doing it, I always get these feelings like we need to do better. And last year at Source, we had a panel discussion in which we discussed what it is that higher education can do in teaching and training for information security, but also in terms of research. And this is really a continuation of that. So I'm an educator, I'm a practitioner. Unfortunately, the overlap between education and practitioners is really small. There don't seem to be a lot of educators who have the practical experience in our field. And in our field, the people who are very good practitioners don't teach much. And that's a little bit of a problem, because how else are new people going to learn what's going on? So, quick show of hands. Who has a formal degree in information security here, or something related to? So we have 2 people here. Oh, 3. Sorry, 4. I count 2. Okay. Undergraduate, graduate, or postgraduate degrees? Graduate? Graduate degrees. Undergraduate, okay. And who has official training in the field? About half-ish, okay. How about self-taught? Almost everyone. See, that's the problem for people who are in education. We want to teach this stuff, yet everyone goes out and does it on their own. That's not how schools work. So what are we doing wrong? That's what I'm trying to learn, and hopefully I have a little bit of an answer for you. So, why don't we do this in school? Why don't we go to professional training? Any suggestions, calls out, ideas? Cost? Too expensive? Jack?
Well, for us old farts, there wasn't a relevant degree back in the Stone Ages.
Back in the Stone Ages, we didn't use computers yet? Okay.
Agreed.
Agreed? Good. Was it better then?
No, it's better or worse. It was just different models didn't exist.
Right.
Exactly.
Which is kind of interesting, because when you look at the stuff that we teach, it goes back to the early 1970s. People talking about things like orange books, rainbow series. That's the stuff that people teach in school. And there is some truth in it, because you kind of need to know a little bit about what's in there. But it really comes back to boring. There is really not much of a challenge very often in what we teach in colleges. It's ancient theory, ancient at least in our perspective. Rainbow books, role-based access control is probably the newest thing we've had. Role-based access control has been around since the early 1990s as a theory. Well before that, it was already used in practice. One of the things we keep in mind is that when we're talking about research, there's two approaches to it. Doctors look at phenomena, or physicists, and try to explain why that phenomenon exists. Engineers try to look at something and make it better, and we're engineers. We're not necessarily researchers in many cases. So we're trying to figure out how to make things better, not why things are the way they are. But the things that we teach often have little or no practical relevance. I can teach forever about discretionary access control, mandatory access control, role-based access control. I can talk about authentication, single factor, dual factor, all the kind of stuff, and before you know it, everyone is like, ugh, can we get this over with and start doing something? Then you get the comments, oh, it's not technical enough. And as soon as you make it a little bit more technical, people go, oh, it's too technical. Which is both true. If you're looking at people who come from a technical perspective, they don't want to be bothered with build your own buffer overflow. If you talk to managers, they will know what? But if I start talking about formalized risk modeling to computer science majors, it's like, okay, when can I code? So there's always finding that balance there. That's teaching. Training, on the other hand, there's a bunch of people out there, and I just listed the ones that I have personal first-hand experience with. If there are others, please shout out. We have, on the one hand, the strictly theoretical people. ISC squared that does the CISSP, there's no practical component to that. Doesn't mean it's not useful, it's not practically applied right now. ISACA with CISM, CISA, and all the other certifications that they keep on rolling out, those are all theory-based things. You read a book, you go sit for an exam, and suddenly you're a certified practitioner. Oh, yeah, you pay them. Sorry, you're right. And you continue to pay. And you continue to pay them. Exactly. Which is kind of, I don't know if you noticed my opening slide. The scissors crossed out. That was exactly the problem that happened there. Then there is training that mixes those two, where you have on the one hand theory, and on the other hand some practical component. The SANS Institute, disclosure, I'm a mentor with them, so I'm a little biased maybe towards their materials. But we typically do a bunch of theory followed by hands-on exercises or a half day or a full day type lab event. Offensive security, theoretical training, self-study, great company based out of Israel. But if you want to be certified, it's a 24 or maybe sometimes 48-hour challenge where you get access to a dedicated environment. You have 48 hours basically to break the infrastructure. All practical, no theory. And then we have higher education, undergraduate, graduate, postgraduate. Typically computer science, although there are some dedicated graduate degree programs out there also. But we're still approaching this very often from the computer science perspective. So when we're looking at this field, the question is, what can we do that is relevant? Because that was one of the complaints, it's irrelevant. That is hands-on, because the complaint was it's too theoretical. That is technical, challenging, and educational. So right now I'm going to omit for this particular talk all non-technical computer security training. So if you want to do formalized risk models, a capture the flag session as what we'll end up with is probably not all that useful right now. Well, it turns out I wasn't the only one thinking about this stuff. In higher education, there's actually the people who train teachers. They've been talking about this in different words. They're talking about high-impact pedagogy. They're talking about experiential learning. And basically what it means is teaching that works and hands-on training, briefly. And when you put those together, teaching that works, hands-on training, and technical, interesting, challenging, in my experience, I ended up with capture the flag type sessions, at least hands-on labs, things that you do, that you see direct results from. And if you then talk about that in higher ed speak, you say experiential learning through hands-on use of tools and techniques in a controlled environment. That makes the educators happy. I call it CTF. But that's basically what I feel and what I've been testing out with my students as being a model that is interesting to them, that is challenging to them. And I'll have a couple of questions for you guys in a second. The basic training of that is, the theory there is break stuff first, then figure out why it broke, and then once you figure that out, try to prevent it from breaking. And that's where the teaching opportunity comes, is on the defensive side and on the offensive side. First, I'll teach you how to break stuff, basically pick up the brick and throw it through a window. Then we figure out why did the window break? Well, there was surface tension and wasn't big enough, and gravity and friction and all that kind of good stuff. And then what can we do? Well, make better glass or bulletproof glass, whatever it may be. But then we put that in computer security terms. And it turns out that by just asking the students, what did you like about this? That's what they like. It's very hands-on, very practical, very result-driven. It's almost since day one where you don't have to go through the first half of a semester where you start worrying about access control, about all those theoretical things that you need to know before you can do something. No, it's very easy to break something from the beginning. Then figuring out why you broke it and how to fix it, that comes later on as the hands-on experience evolves. And that's true for technical training too. I've tried this model with security people, I've tried it with sysadmins. I've even tried it with managers once. That wasn't so much of a success. But there's a couple of models out there. How do you do these lab-based things, these CTF-based things? You can use a single-user portable environment. dice.net is a website out there. What they basically did years ago, I think I first learned about them on the last HOPE conference in New York, is they created a bunch of bootable ISOs. You can just download, boot, and you get a prompt. And that's all you get. Your goal is to achieve root access to the file system, to the system. So they don't give you many hints. It's just an ISO, and you go. There's a couple of different levels that you can go through. Very interesting, very well done. It's single user, portable, you can do it at your own time. There's no training associated with it. It's just a test of skills. And if you want to learn something more, you're on your own. Go figure out where to learn this kind of stuff. But it's interesting. And they range from very easy to kind of advanced. theory with hands-on labs. We just said earlier, the SANS teaching model does that a lot, where they will teach you and then end with a lab session. The other model is using that lab, capture the flag, for certification, which is what offensive security does. And then, of course, CTF for self-training, a relatively new arrival. It's called NetWars. It's a partnership between Ed Scotus' company and SANS. They've been marketing it a lot, where you basically go through 5 levels. It's focusing a lot on government and military. Where it's basically starting out with a self-assessment on a VMware ISO and then going all the way to a remote access lab. In the end, level 5, it's literally a defend your own castle type thing, and of course, and conquer. There's no training there. It's self-training. You'll figure out and you'll research it as you go. Yes.
I'm kind of new to the whole area,
Mm-hmm.
so I was up there searching around. I found something called CyberPatriot, which is, I guess it's kind of a structure for high school students.
Yes.
To operate and capture the flag.
It is very similar to that. It's basically where they will put high school kids through a number of tests, try to identify potential in students and skill.
If you go onto their website, I think you'll find a rich
Yeah.
environment for anyone.
It is. It's called CyberPatriot, just to repeat it so that the audio also gets it. It's interesting. That kind of fits into the whole assessment part also. It's not training. They don't teach you anything really there. It is really almost a recruitment tool. How do I find the gems that are worth pulling out and developing further? So, who has taken courses like this with these hands-on practical experiences and is willing to talk about them? Good, bad, indifferent?
I can give them that word.
Mm-hmm.
It was a good experience. The thing that I would change, sorry.
Yeah, do you need a microphone or not? Do you mind using a microphone? Thank you.
I did the NetWars competition, and the one issue that I had with it was that it was permissible within the rules to lock down the boxes and it was permissible to lock down the boxes and prevent others from attacking the same targets, which, in my opinion, prevented others from being able to complete the same challenges, even given the knowledge or capability to do so. I prefer when capture the flag exercises allow people, no matter what stage of the game or what level of experience, to be able to have the same capability to exploit, to learn from the challenges as others.
Excellent. Thank you for that feedback. Yeah, one of the things that is also very common in these capture the flag type exercises is that there is a no denial of service rule. I think that's fair, especially if you're playing in collaborative environments. How far did you get? What level?
I was in the very early on.
Okay.
Before there were
Levels?
levels.
Yeah.
But I made it pretty deeply and actually went to the in-person final round.
Oh, nice. Very good. Interesting.
So I'm going to say it really depends on why you're playing a capture the flag competition in the first place. There's a lot of differences between something that's, say, targeted more at an educational or learning environment versus where schools see that. Full disclosure, I play in pretty much every CTF I can get my hands on, as well as I'll run a number of CTFs.
Awesome. Yep. What is the most challenging part of doing it though? Why would you say, I really like this, which is that? So why do you really like doing the CTS? What's the rewarding part about it?
For me, it's a challenge.
Mm-hmm.
It's a challenge that's concentrated generally in a short period of time, so it's very focused.
Yeah.
And basically, here's this challenge. Go break it, go defend against it, whatever it is.
So it's addressing that part where normal teaching is very boring. If it takes a very long time, you can...
It's not just that. It's also applying
The hands-on, the relevant server.
Be hands-on. That way, it's more realistic than often classroom education and learning. And
Yes.
it provides for that accelerated growth and learning environment.
Absolutely.
It's a challenge, so all of a sudden I need to figure out how to solve it, which in a day-to-day role, day-to-day job, I may never come across, or solve it by going and talking to someone else, etc.
Right, or in your day-to-day job, you need to solve it and you see it for the first time, where in the CTF you may have experienced it before. Right. Any other feedback on that? Why, yeah?
You also learn the tools and the concepts,
Mm-hmm.
What can go wrong, how to get it running correctly, what does and what doesn't work, specifics on what you're doing.
Yeah, no, I agree.
It's also something of a low-risk environment. I work in pen testing now, and
If you break something, it's not yours.
yeah, if I break something, if I completely destroy something to the point where it's inoperable during a pen test, I might be out of a job.
Yeah, your boss is not going to be happy.
During a CTF, I have a good giggle about it, and then I move on.
Yep. Well, and that brings us to here, like, why are you doing this? What is the goal of the environment that you're trying to set up or participate in? Are you trying to do it as a competition to test your skills against those of others? Are you trying it out as a proof of concept? There is nothing wrong with setting up a lab like this where you want to try those new exploitation techniques or the new tools that you just found in a controlled environment where if you blow something up, it's, oh well, I'll reboot it and we're back to normal, rather than, oops, we just lost $100,000, which is bad in most cases. Do you do it for training purposes? Are you trying to teach someone how to do it or how not to do certain things, which is often even more difficult? Or is it entertainment? Is it just kick back with a bunch of friends and have fun? All of them are options. So when you are going to set this up, you need to know that. So the first decision, if you are going to develop a CTF environment, is are you going to use physical or virtual equipment? And there are drawbacks and benefits to both. If you blow up a virtual machine, you hit reboot and you're back to normal. If you brick that switch, it's going to take a while. On the other hand, if you are on a physical environment, you might be able to do things that you cannot do in a virtual environment. Especially networking equipment is notoriously hard to virtualize. It's very difficult to implement that IPS test in a virtual environment, for example, unless your vendor has a VM-based environment. So that's a decision that you have to make. Typical, a VM-based environment is much more portable. You can pick it up, put it on another machine, and you're back up and running. Physical machines require a lot of heavy lifting in many cases. Second decision to make is, are you going to do it local or remote? In other words, are you going to have a bunch of people in the room like we have here, or are they going to be anywhere in the world and need to connect into the network? Which is a situation that I have when I teach undergraduate especially. I have a bunch of undergraduate students, say 25, that need access to a network. I want them to focus their attacks on that network, and if they mistype an IP address, I don't want to get the call from God knows what external company saying, hey, why are you attacking my network? So I want to be able to, if I do this remote session, which I cannot air gap, I got to make sure that I do it in such a way that I cannot have collateral damage or accidental damage to others' infrastructure, or my own infrastructure for that matter. So that's a big one. And of course, the third decision to make is, do you want to do single user or multi-user? CTFs are typically in a multi-user context. But if you're doing the training, like for example, the first one I mentioned, the dice.net bootable CDs, those are single user environments. So that makes life a whole lot easier. So once you've made those decisions, in many cases you want to bring out a message. You want to, especially when you're teaching something, you want to say plain text passwords are bad. You want to be able to do, if you're using SSL, make sure that you check the certification path. Those are lessons that you can teach people very clearly in an environment where they're able to exploit things like this. Common misconception, cross-site scripting is harmless, especially when you're talking to web developers. Let's echo back something. Yeah, until they actually break their own stuff and figure out that, hey, those were just my cookies that flew away. Landman is a weak password scheme. Whatever it may be, you need to know what those lessons are that you want to convey or what those prizes are that you want to offer up. I found that telling a story is very, very helpful. So if I am setting up a CTF, I usually have a story written. John is a senior DBA who is approaching retirement but feels that he's underpaid. John has been in this position for 19 years. Well, what does that tell you? I have been doing it like this for 15 years and I'm not going to change because of this new technology type stuff. Seen it in real life. Sarah is a 19-year-old intern who's helping out the office manager. She has a whole lot of friends with who she likes to stay in contact via Facebook and Twitter. So either they're clues as to where to focus your attacks, or you're blowing smoke, which is also a possibility in a CTF. Peter is a departmental manager. He's a road warrior who needs access to everything at all times. Great, one of those. And then you can start telling a story about your infrastructure. which just has a lot of details in here. Where, for example, talking about a server on the network with a specific IP address, it has all kinds of stuff, and there runs a job runs on it that if you do a man-in-the-middle attack on layer 2 type thing or poisoning, you would be able to find. So I haven't built anything yet. I'm just telling the story, setting the stage, describing the infrastructure that I want to build, and after I do that and I have everything in place, then I can start building that environment on which these things can take place. I can start combining operating systems. I can put in middleware and like, oh, let's throw in a MySQL server, a Postgres server, and an MS SQL type thing that God knows what. Applications, I'm running Apache and IIS, and on top of that, I'm using some kind of shopping cart software. And I'm starting to play with configurations. I'm starting to play with users with weak passwords. I'm starting to do all kinds of things. And then I'm going to throw in like automated FTP jobs, SSH scripts with or without forced commands that I can leverage, because an automated SSH script probably doesn't have a key, but it does get me into a server. So that's the kind of stuff that you can then start playing. And all of these things happen in real environments. And until you show people how bad it really is in those environments, there's not much that they will do to stop it. Yes?
This is interactive, can I jump in?
Yes, at any time. Oh, yeah. Let's see if we can prevent it from feedback.
So I'm looking at all this, and it's really cool how you've laid it out but it seems like you're targeting security professionals. And so I'll just form a proper question. So what I'm kind of curious is, how can this expand into in a realm, because I can assure you, I teach developers all the time, that this would go over most of their heads. And so I'm curious how this could be expanded into a way that people can get something.
Just to piggyback on what he said, I was just down in DC last weekend at the Living Social headquarters, and they basically take people out of HR off the street, and they're doing CTF in a place in the basement called Fishbowl.
Right.
Well, they're kind of doing what you're saying. It's not targeted towards security, but just for anybody.
Okay, let me jump into this then. The local OWASP chapter near me asked me if I could do something for them. And I did set up a CTF like this, where we had not many security professionals at an OWASP meeting, to be completely surprised. I had developers and I had sysadmins. And I did a 15 minutes presentation about what is the OWASP top 10, the top 10 most common vulnerabilities in web applications. And I developed a CRM app that is broken on so many different levels that I had to try to make it even more broken. And I just let them play with it. And as they came back, they went, ooh, this is in my code. Ooh, we shouldn't be doing this. Did you just steal my cookie? And that was very interesting to see with the developers especially, not so much with the sysadmins, especially not if you have network admins, because like, it's an IP address, what do you care? That they were starting to get it, as in, what's wrong with running that bad job over FTP? Well, this is wrong because I just got your password. And not so much focusing on all the theory, but just on the outcomes. And then very simple, saying, this is what you can do to solve it. Use a parameterized query rather than just copy-pasting your data in it. Isn't that more difficult? Actually, no, it isn't, because it's exactly the same. It's just a kind of a different call. And that turned out to be very eye-opening for them, to the fact that it's now done it 3 times in a row. They just asked me to come back with that for OWASP. And I think that was even more interesting than talking to people like you here, security guys who know what they're talking about and are struggling with, why can't these developers just get it? Because they've never seen it happen. They've never seen the consequences of what happens when you leave that cross-site scripting in your software and someone walks off with your cookies and goes into your Gmail type thing. And that turned out to be very eye-opening to them. Well, then it's, of course, especially with these OWASP meetings, kind of difficult to see if they get it and walk out and fix their own code going back, because it is true. It is very much managed out of scope in many cases. Like, we need to go to market now, so forget about all the security stuff, just get it to work. Well, if you're aware of that from the beginning, you can put those things in correctly. And we did that in a setup like this, where we had a bunch of virtual machines tied together, where basically there were a couple of different lessons that I wanted to show them. Like, don't use plain text as a pop, for example. One PC was popping from another PC while the machine also had pop S open. Oh, great, we'll just change everything to pop S. Yes, but you're not using certificate validation, so it doesn't really make a difference because you're letting everything go through anyway. Oh, that's bad, isn't it? Yeah, it is. but, and then you start talking from vulnerability to risk, where you start saying, you know what, this SSL stuff is interesting, the man-in-the-middle stuff is important, but you have to be on the same VLAN to be able to do certain things, on the same local network, I should say, layer 2 broadcast domain. So, as you start managing and explaining to things like, oh, is that what my sysadmins mean when they talk about broadcast domains? Yes, that's what they mean. So there are other things that you then have to explain to them, but just that eye-opening moment where they realize, I just got his password. That usually flips the switch and at least gives them 10 more minutes to think about, next time that I'll build a new app, I'll try to think of that. And the one thing is that the only way that you can get these people in a room like that is if they enjoy doing it. And we're all technical people, we all have our inner geek, we all like to play games, and the way to unlock those inner geeks is by playing those games, and the CTF in the end is a game that has very measurable outcomes. So let's go back here. What I skipped over was actually running the challenge. Are you doing it as a lab environment? Are you going to score the participants, for example? How are you going to score them? Are you going to score just on outcomes, which is what a lot of them do, is you find some nugget and a SHA-1 hash or an MD5 hash that you paste into a scoring server, and how you got it is absolutely irrelevant. It's just the outcomes that count. Or are you going to say, I am going to ask you to document everything you did. Notice that you'll take away a lot of the fun because no one likes documentation. And judge people on the process that they follow, not so much on the outcomes. All those decisions you have to make before you run the CTF. And of course, if you are scoring, everyone likes a game, everyone likes a challenge, which means that you need to have a winner. And you need to acknowledge the winner and give him something nice. It doesn't have to be something expensive, because they're all inner geeks, so there is always something there. Now, there's one caveat that I want to close with because my time is up, unless there is more discussion and questions. If you are building a CTF, you're not going to get much out of it. You know everything that's in there. If you're going to participate in a CTF that someone else built, different story. The one model that we haven't discussed is head-to-head, where you have the ability to build your own system or take over a system and then defend it against other groups. That is a completely different realm that is not, at least, very useful in teaching and training as we are now. That is so super advanced. And that is really a test of skills rather than educational opportunity, in my opinion. So that's, I think for me, the biggest discussion always once I build one of these new scenarios with, okay, these are the lessons that I want to teach, these are my main characters, these are the infrastructure, everything is done, and then it's just sitting there and watching others have the fun. That's kind of disappointing. So if you are planning to get into this kind of stuff, same thing if you want to try new tools. First you're going to build a machine, a virtual machine in most cases, that you know is vulnerable. And then the next step is you're going to find a tool to see if it is vulnerable, which is kind of silly, because you already know what is going to happen when you run the tool. So that's always, the builder of the CTF, I think, usually gets the least from it, but it is very entertaining to see how other people use it. I think the use of a CTF in teaching, especially professional, but also undergraduate, graduate, technical people, is very, very good. Any questions or things that I forgot to mention, things I need to raise? No? My time is up. Thank you for your attention.